The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Flying J truck stop just outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. The August heat was already beginning to rise from the asphalt in shimmering waves, even though it was barely 8 in the morning. Semi-trucks lined the back of the lot like sleeping giants, their chrome details glinting in the early light. The smell of diesel fuel hung in the air, mixing with the distant aroma of coffee and fried food drifting from the restaurant inside. Harold Mitchell eased his weathered body out of the cab of his Peterbilt 389, his knees protesting with the familiar ache that had become his constant companion over the past few years. At 67 years old, he had been driving trucks for 43 years, and every single one of those years had left its mark on his body. His hands, large and calloused, gripped the door handle as he stepped down onto the running board, then to the ground. The impact sent a jolt through his spine, but he was used to it by now. He stood for a moment, stretching his back, feeling the vertebrae pop and crack like bubble wrap. His faded blue baseball cap, embroidered with the logo of a trucking company that had gone out of business 15 years ago, sat crooked on his head of thin grey hair. His face was a road map of wrinkles, each line telling a story of long nights on the road, of missed birthdays and holidays spent in rest areas, of a life dedicated to keeping America's goods moving from coast to coast. Harold reached back into the cab and grabbed his worn leather wallet, checking to make sure he had enough cash for breakfast. Inside, tucked behind his driver's license, was a photo of his late wife, Margaret, who had passed away 3 years ago. He touched the photo briefly, a ritual he performed every morning, before closing the wallet and sliding it into the back pocket of his jeans. Margaret smiled up at him from that photo, frozen in time at 52 years old, before the cancer had taken hold. He still talked to her sometimes, late at night, when the highway stretched endlessly before him, and loneliness pressed down like a physical weight. The truck stop was busy this morning. Harold nodded to a few familiar faces as he made his way toward the entrance. Truckers were a brotherhood, even if they didn't always know each other's names. A simple nod, a wave, a tip of the hat, these were the greetings of the road. They understood each other in ways that civilians never could. They knew the bone-deep exhaustion of driving through the night, the quiet pride of delivering a load on time, the strange peace that came from watching the sun rise over an empty highway. Inside, the air conditioning hit him like a wall of relief. The smell of coffee and bacon filled his nostrils, and his stomach growled in anticipation. He had driven through the night from Kansas City, and he was exhausted and hungry in equal measure. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a slightly yellowish glow. The linoleum floor was scuffed from decades of boots, and the booths were patched with duct tape in places, but it felt like home. "Morning, Harold," called out Dolores, the middle-aged waitress who had been working at this particular truck stop for as long as Harold could remember. She was already pouring him a cup of coffee before he even sat down at his usual spot at the counter. Her hair was graying at the temples now, and she moved a little slower than she used to, but her smile was the same as it had been 15 years ago when Harold first started stopping here. "Morning, Dolores," he replied, his voice gravelly from disuse. He had a habit of not talking much during his drives, preferring the company of country music and his own thoughts. "How's that grandbaby of yours?" Dolores beamed, her whole face lighting up in a way that made her look 20 years younger. "Growing like a weed. Already trying to walk, can you believe it? She's not even 9 months old yet. Her mama sends me videos every day. Yesterday she said Nana for the first time. Well, it sounded more like na-na, but I'm counting it." Harold smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across his weathered face. They grow up fast, cherish every moment. He didn't have grandchildren of his own. His only son, David, had died in a car accident 20 years ago, at the age of 22. It was a pain that never fully healed, a wound that Margaret's death had only deepened. But Harold had learned to carry his grief quietly, like a heavy load in the back of his truck, always there, always weighing on him, but something he had learned to manage. Some days were harder than others. Some days he could almost forget. And then a song would come on the radio, or he'd pass a billboard for a movie David would have loved, and the grief would crash over him like a wave. The usual? Dolores asked, though she was already writing it down on her pad. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, bacon crispy, hash browns scattered and smothered. You know me too well, Harold chuckled. As he waited for his eggs and toast, Harold pulled out his phone, an older model smartphone that his nephew had helped him set up a few years ago. He wasn't much for technology, but he had learned to use it for the basics, checking weather, getting directions, and occasionally calling his sister in Nebraska. She worried about him, driving at his age, but he always assured her he was fine. What else was he going to do? Sit in an empty house and wait to die? At least on the road, he felt useful. At least on the road, he had purpose. The bell above the door chimed, and Harold glanced up out of habit. A young man walked in, probably in his mid-20s, with carefully styled hair and clothes that looked like they cost more than Harold's weekly grocery bill. He was holding his phone out in front of him, the camera clearly recording, and he was narrating to it in an animated voice. "All right, guys, we just pulled into this truck stop in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. My boy Derek is filling up the Lambo outside. Yeah, you heard that right. We drove the Lambo all the way from LA. Road trip content, baby. This place is absolutely wild. Look at all these trucks. It's like we stepped back in time or something. I feel like I'm in a documentary about, like, Forgotten America or whatever." Harold turned back to his coffee, uninterested in whatever the young man was doing. He had seen plenty of strange things in his years on the road, and a young person talking to their phone was hardly the strangest. He'd seen a man walking a llama across a truck stop parking lot in Nevada. He'd seen a woman in a wedding dress hitchhiking in New Mexico. Nothing surprised him anymore. The young man's name was Brandon Reeves, though his 3 million followers on TikTok knew him as Brandon Flex X. He had built his following on a combination of flashy lifestyle content, pranks, and what he called real talk videos, where he offered unsolicited opinions on everything from relationships to economics. His content was designed to be provocative, to generate engagement through controversy. The algorithm rewarded outrage, and Brandon had learned to exploit that better than most. He had grown up poor in a small town in Iowa, and the hunger to prove himself, to show everyone who had ever doubted him that he had made it, drove everything he did. With him was his friend Derek, who was indeed filling up a bright yellow Lamborghini at the pump outside. Derek was Brandon's unofficial cameraman and hype man, though he had his own modest following of about 200,000 subscribers on YouTube. They had met at a content creator conference 3 years ago, and had been inseparable since, feeding off each other's energy and ambition. Brandon scanned the truck stop, looking for content. His eyes landed on a family sitting in a booth, a tired-looking mother, a father in a mechanic's uniform who had clearly just gotten off a night shift, and a little boy of about 8 years old who was playing with a toy truck. The boy's name was Tyler, and he was absolutely fascinated by trucks. He had been begging his parents to stop at this truck stop ever since they passed the sign on the highway, just so he could see the big rigs up close. His father, James, had reluctantly agreed, even though they were running late for a family event. James knew what it was like to have passions as a child, and he didn't want to crush his son's enthusiasm. He remembered being Tyler's age, obsessed with dinosaurs, dragging his parents to every natural history museum within driving distance. His parents had indulged him, and he had grown into a man who still felt wonder at the world. He wanted the same for his son. Brandon's eyes swept past the family and landed on Harold, sitting alone at the counter, hunched over his coffee. Something about the old man struck Brandon as perfect content material. The contrast between his flashy lifestyle and this weathered trucker would make for great engagement. His followers loved when he interacted with real people. They loved seeing the gap between Brandon's world and everyone else's. It made them feel like they were part of something exclusive, something aspirational. "Hold on, guys," Brandon said to his phone. "I think I just found today's main character. Let's go say hello to this gentleman over here." Harold didn't notice Brandon approaching until the young man was standing right next to him, phone thrust forward like a weapon. "Hey there, sir. Brandon Reeves here. What's your name?" Harold looked up, confusion evident on his face. "Harold. Can I help you with something?" "Harold. Classic name. Love it. Very retro. So, Harold, I'm doing a little series on my TikTok where I talk to people about their lives. You're a truck driver, right?" Harold glanced at the phone, then back at Brandon. He wasn't comfortable with being recorded, but he was from a generation that believed in being polite, even when you didn't want to be. His mother had raised him to treat everyone with respect, even people who didn't deserve it. That's right, 43 years. 43 years. Wow, that's amazing. That's like your whole life, basically. So tell me, Harold, how much do you make doing that, like ballpark figure? Harold frowned. "I don't think that's any of your business, son." Brandon laughed, a performative sound designed for his audience. "Come on, Harold, we're all friends here. I'm just curious. Because I was thinking, I make more in a month from my content than you probably make in a year. Isn't that crazy? Like the world has changed so much. The game is different now." Harold felt his face flush with a mix of embarrassment and anger. He wasn't a man prone to losing his temper. 43 years on the road had taught him patience. But something about this young man's arrogance grated on him. It reminded him of his own youth, of the mistakes he had made when he thought he knew everything. "I do all right," Harold said quietly. "I've never needed much." "Never needed much," Brandon repeated, turning to address his camera. "You hear that, guys? This is what I'm always talking about. This mindset right here is why people stay broke. No ambition, no hustle, just accepting mediocrity. This is what happens when you don't believe in yourself, when you don't shoot for the stars." At the booth, Tyler had stopped playing with his toy truck. He was watching the interaction with wide eyes, sensing that something wasn't right. His father, James, was also watching, his brow furrowed. His wife, Maria, put a protective hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Son, I think you should move along," Harold said, his voice steady but firm. Hold on, Brandon said, clearly enjoying himself. "I'm not trying to be mean here, Harold. I'm trying to help. I'm trying to show people what not to do with their lives. Look at you, you're what, 65, 70, 67. 67 years old, and you're still working, still driving a truck. That's sad, man. That's actually sad. If you had made better choices, you could be retired right now. You could be on a beach somewhere, sipping margaritas, living your best life. Instead, you're sitting in a truck stop in Oklahoma, eating cheap eggs. No offense to the eggs." Harold's hands tightened around his coffee cup. He could feel the eyes of other patrons on him, could feel their pity and their discomfort. He had survived a lot in his life. The loss of his son, the loss of his wife, countless nights alone on the road. But he had never felt as small as he did in this moment. This young man, with his expensive clothes and his phone and his millions of followers, had reduced him to nothing with a few careless words. "I like my job," Harold said quietly. "I like driving. I like seeing the country. I like being useful." "You like your job," Brandon scoffed. "Guys, he likes his job. As if driving a truck is something to be proud of. As if delivering boxes is some kind of noble profession. This is exactly the kind of broke mindset that keeps people trapped. You could have been somebody, Harold. Instead, you're just a truck driver." Dolores, who had been watching from behind the counter, slammed down a plate of food harder than necessary. "That's enough," she said sharply. "Leave him alone." Brandon turned his phone toward her. "Ooh, we've got a feisty waitress here too. What's your name, sweetheart?" "My name is—" "Get out of my truck stop before I call the police," Dolores snapped. Her eyes were blazing with a protectiveness that went beyond professional courtesy. Harold had been her customer for 15 years. He had been there when her husband died, had slipped her extra money when she mentioned her daughter was struggling. He was one of the good ones, and she would not stand by while some city kid tore him down. Relax, relax, Brandon laughed. First Amendment lady. I can film wherever I want in a public space. At this point, little Tyler had gotten out of his booth and was walking toward the counter. His parents tried to call him back, but he was already standing in front of Harold, looking up at the old man with an expression of pure admiration. Are you really a truck driver? Tyler asked, his voice filled with wonder. Harold looked down at the boy, and despite the humiliation still burning in his chest, he managed a smile. That's right, son. Been driving since before your daddy was born, I'd wager. That's so cool, Tyler breathed. I love trucks. My favorite is the big red one with the long nose, the Kenworth. But I also like the Mack trucks because they have the bulldog on the hood. What kind do you have? I drive a Peterbilt 389, Harold said. She's sitting right outside if you want to see her later. She's blue with silver trim. I call her Margaret after my wife. Tyler's eyes went wide. Really? Can I, Dad? Can I? James had approached by now, placing a protective hand on his son's shoulder. He shot a withering look at Brandon. You should be ashamed of yourself, he said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Brandon, sensing that the tide was turning against him, tried to play it off. Hey, I'm just having a conversation here. No need to get hostile. You're not having a conversation, James said. You're humiliating an old man for clicks. What kind of person does that? The kind of person with 3 million followers, Brandon shot back, his charming facade slipping slightly. 3 million people who watch you be cruel to strangers, James replied. That's not something to be proud of. My son has more character in his little finger than you have in your whole body. Tyler tugged on Harold's sleeve. Mister, I think truck drivers are heroes. My teacher says you bring everything we need to the stores, food and toys and medicine and everything. She says without truck drivers, the whole country would stop. She says you're the backbone of America. Harold felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. This child, this innocent little boy, had done more to restore his dignity in 30 seconds than anything else could have. That's right, son, Harold said, his voice thick. We keep the country moving, rain or shine, day or night. When everyone else is sleeping, we're out there on the road, making sure people have what they need. Brandon, seeing that he was losing control of the narrative, tried one more angle. All right, wholesome moment. But seriously, Harold, wouldn't you rather be doing something else, something that actually matters? Something that makes a difference in the world? Before Harold could respond, the door to the truck stop burst open, and a woman rushed in, her face frantic. Is there a truck driver here? A Harold Mitchell? She called out, her voice trembling with emotion. Harold stood up, alarmed. That's me. What's wrong? The woman, who appeared to be in her 40s with disheveled hair and tear-streaked mascara, rushed toward him. Oh, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. I called your company, and they said you might be stopped here. My name is Sarah. Sarah Whitman. You don't know me, but 20 years ago you saved my life. Harold's brow furrowed in confusion. I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't... February 14th, 2004, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. Interstate 70, near Denver. There was a blizzard. I was in a car accident. My car went off the road and down an embankment. I was trapped, freezing. I was pregnant, and I thought I was going to die. I had given up. I was ready to die. Harold's eyes widened as the memory came flooding back. The silver Honda. You were in the silver Honda, the Civic. Yes, Sarah sobbed. You stopped. You climbed down that embankment in the middle of a blizzard. You pulled me out of the car and carried me back up to the road. You stayed with me until the ambulance came. You saved my life. You saved my daughter's life. Brandon had lowered his phone slightly, his expression uncertain. This was not the content he had been expecting. This was not what he had planned. I tried to find you, Sarah continued. After I got out of the hospital, I tried to find you, but I didn't know your name. All I remembered was your face and your truck, a blue Peterbilt. I've been looking for you for 20 years. I hired private investigators. I posted on trucker forums. I never gave up. And then last week I saw your picture on Facebook. My cousin's husband is a trucker, and he knows you. He told me your route, told me you always stop here on Tuesday mornings." Harold was stunned. He remembered that night vividly. The terror in the young woman's eyes, the cold biting through his gloves as he clawed at the crumpled car door, the weight of her pregnant body as he carried her through the snow. It had been one of the most difficult rescues of his life, and afterward he had simply gotten back in his truck and continued on his route. He had never expected thanks. He had never expected to see her again. He had just done what needed to be done. "Your daughter," Harold said softly. "She was okay?" Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, showing Harold a photo. "Her name is Hope. She's 19 years old now. She's studying to be a nurse. She wants to help people the way you helped us. She's wanted to meet you her whole life. I've told her your story 1,000 times. She's outside right now, too nervous to come in." Harold's tears were flowing freely now. He didn't care who saw them. He didn't care about Brandon or his phone or his millions of followers. All he cared about was this woman and the daughter he had helped bring into the world. I'd like to meet her. I'd like that very much." Sarah turned toward the door and waved. A moment later, a young woman with auburn hair and her mother's eyes walked in. She was trembling, and when she saw Harold, she burst into tears. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice breaking, "I've wanted to thank you my whole life. I exist because of you. Everything I am, everything I'll ever be, it's because you stopped that night. You didn't have to. No one would have blamed you for keeping driving in that blizzard. But you stopped. You risked your life for strangers." Hope walked forward and threw her arms around Harold. The old trucker, who had spent so many years feeling invisible, feeling like just another anonymous figure on the highway, stood in the middle of that truck stop and wept into the shoulder of the young woman whose life he had saved before she was even born. The truck stop had gone completely silent. Patrons who had been eating their breakfast had stopped mid-bite. Truckers who had been checking their phones had looked up. Even Dolores, who had seen just about everything in her years behind the counter, was wiping tears from her eyes with her apron. Brandon Reeves stood frozen, his phone still recording. For the first time in his content creation career, he didn't know what to say. He had set out to humiliate an old man for entertainment, and instead he had stumbled into something profound, something that exposed the shallowness of his entire worldview. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: shame, genuine, burning shame. Derek had come in from outside, presumably to tell Brandon that the car was ready, but he had stopped at the door, watching the scene unfold with an expression of dawning understanding. James, Tyler's father, stepped forward. "You wanted to know what truck drivers are worth?" he said to Brandon, his voice cold. "You're looking at it. This man saved 2 lives. How many lives have you saved with your content? How many people are better off because of what you do?" Brandon opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Tyler walked over to Harold and tugged on his sleeve again. "I knew you were a hero," the boy said simply. "I knew it the moment I saw you." Harold, still holding Hope with one arm, reached down and ruffled Tyler's hair with his free hand. "Anyone would have done the same," he said. "No," Sarah said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I was stranded on that road for 20 minutes before you came along. At least a dozen cars passed me. They could see my car down in the ditch. They could see my hazard lights flashing. They all kept driving. They didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to risk themselves. You were the only one who stopped." Harold thought about that night, about the dozens of cars that had passed by the accident scene without slowing down. He thought about how easy it would have been to do the same, to convince himself that someone else would help, that it wasn't his problem. But he had been raised to believe that every person had a responsibility to help their neighbor, and he had never been able to drive past someone in need. His father had taught him that. His father, a farmer in rural Oklahoma, who had once driven 30 miles in a snowstorm to help a stranger whose car had broken down. "I couldn't just leave you there," Harold said quietly. "It's not in my nature. My daddy always said, 'Son, a man is measured by what he does when no one is watching.' No one was watching that night. But I knew what I had to do." Brandon, finally finding his voice, tried to salvage the situation. "Hey, this is amazing. What a story, right? Truck driver hero saves lives. See, guys, this is why I do what I do. You never know what stories you're going to uncover." But no one was buying it. The patrons of the truck stop looked at him with undisguised contempt. Even Derek, his own friend, was shaking his head. "You were making fun of him 5 minutes ago," James said. "You called him a nobody. You said driving a truck wasn't a noble profession. Now you want to act like you're part of this story." I didn't know." "Exactly," James cut him off. "You didn't know. You didn't bother to find out anything about this man before you started tearing him down. You saw an old guy in a truck stop and decided he was an easy target for your content. That's what you do, isn't it? You find people you think are beneath you, and you use them for entertainment." Brandon's face flushed red. "That's not—" "I've seen your videos," James continued. "You mock fast food workers. You make fun of people for their clothes, their cars, their jobs. You've built your whole career on making other people feel small. And for what? Money? Fame? Is that really worth it? Is that what you want to be remembered for?" Brandon was silent. Hope, still standing close to Harold, turned to look at Brandon. "You know what my mom taught me? She taught me that every person has a story. Every single person you pass on the street, every person serving you coffee, every person driving a truck on the highway. They all have a story. They have families, dreams, struggles, triumphs. They've loved and lost and fought and survived. And you don't know any of it just by looking at them." "I was just having fun," Brandon mumbled, but his voice lacked conviction. "Making fun of people isn't fun," Hope said. "It's just mean, and it doesn't make you important. It just makes you unkind. It makes you small." Sarah stepped forward, her protective instincts flaring. "You should delete that video. Whatever you recorded of Harold being humiliated, you should delete it. It's the least you can do." Brandon hesitated. That video, with its juicy conflict and dramatic twist, would probably go viral. It would be his biggest hit in months. Every content creator bone in his body was screaming at him to keep it, to post it, to ride the engagement wave. But something else was happening inside him too. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. Genuine, burning shame. He thought about his own grandfather, a factory worker who had died when Brandon was 12. His grandfather had worked hard his whole life, had never been rich or famous. But everyone in town had come to his funeral, hundreds of people, all with stories of how his grandfather had helped them. Brandon hadn't thought about his grandfather in years. He had been too busy chasing clout, too busy trying to prove he was somebody. Harold, who had been silent during this exchange, spoke up. "Son, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your video. That's your choice. But I want you to think about something. When you're my age, and God willing you will be one day, what kind of man do you want to be? What do you want to be remembered for?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "I've lived 67 years, Harold continued. "I've driven millions of miles. I've seen this country from coast to coast, in every season, in every kind of weather. I've missed a lot. I missed my son's graduation because I was on a run. I missed his wedding because I was on a run. I missed his funeral because I was stuck in a snowstorm 1,000 miles away. I have a lot of regrets." He paused, his eyes distant, seeing things that no one else in the room could see. "But I also have moments like that night in Colorado, moments where I knew, without a doubt, that I had done something good, something that mattered. And here's the thing, I didn't do it for recognition. I didn't do it so someone would call me a hero. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and that feeling, that knowledge that you've helped someone when they needed it most, that's worth more than all the money in the world. That's worth more than 3 million followers." Brandon was staring at Harold with an expression that was hard to read. There was defensiveness there, yes, but also something else, something that might have been the beginning of understanding, something that might have been the first stirrings of change. "You're young," Harold said. "You've got time to decide what kind of man you want to be, but that decision, it's not something you can put off forever. Every day, with every choice you make, you're becoming someone. The question is whether you're becoming someone you can be proud of." Derek, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. "Brandon, man, maybe we should go." Brandon nodded slowly. He looked down at his phone, at the recording that was still running. For a long moment, he stared at it. Then he stopped the recording and deleted it. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Harold. That wasn't okay. What I did wasn't okay. I was wrong." Harold nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, son. We all make mistakes. The important thing is what we do next." Brandon turned and walked toward the door, Derek following behind him. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "For what it's worth," he said, "you're a better man than I'll ever be." "That's not true," Harold replied. "You can be a better man. You just have to choose to be." Then Brandon was gone. The truck stop slowly returned to normal. Patrons went back to their meals. The clatter of dishes resumed. But there was a different energy in the room now, a sense of having witnessed something important, something that would stay with everyone who had been there. Harold sat back down at the counter, suddenly exhausted. The emotional roller coaster of the past 15 minutes had taken its toll. Sarah and Hope sat down on either side of him. "I know this is a lot," Sarah said. "I'm sorry for ambushing you like this. I've waited so long to find you, to thank you." Harold shook his head. "Don't apologize. This is the best morning I've had in years. Maybe the best morning I've had since Margaret passed." Hope leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of affection that felt natural despite the fact that they had only just met. "Will you tell me about that night? What you remember?" So Harold did. He told her about the blizzard, about how the snow was coming down so hard he could barely see the road. He told her about the flash of silver he saw out of the corner of his eye, the Honda barely visible in the ditch below. He told her about his decision to stop, even though it meant risking his own safety, even though every logical part of his brain was telling him to keep driving. "Your mother was conscious when I got to her," Harold said. "She was scared, but she was strong. She kept her composure. She told me she was pregnant. She told me she couldn't lose her baby. She kept saying, 'Please, please, save my baby.'" Sarah was crying again. "I was so scared. I thought that was it. I thought I was going to die in that car, and my baby was going to die with me. I had already started saying goodbye. I was praying, and I'm not even religious." "I couldn't let that happen," Harold said simply. "I just couldn't." He told them about the struggle to open the jammed door, about finally getting it open and pulling Sarah free. He told them about the climb back up the embankment, how he had slipped and fallen twice, each time managing to shield Sarah from the impact. He told them about waiting by the side of the road, holding Sarah in his arms to keep her warm, until finally the ambulance arrived. "I wanted to go to the hospital with you," Harold said, "but I had a load that had to be delivered. Medicine for a hospital in Salt Lake City. People were depending on it. Sick people, kids. I couldn't let them down." "That sounds like you," Sarah said through her tears, "always thinking about other people." Little Tyler had been listening to the story with rapt attention. His toy truck was clutched forgotten in his hand. "Mr. Harold," he said, "when I grow up, I want to be just like you." Harold looked at the boy, at his earnest face and shining eyes, and felt something shift inside his chest. For years he had felt like his life was winding down, like his best days were behind him. His wife was gone, his son was gone, he had no grandchildren, no legacy to leave behind. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe legacy wasn't just about blood relatives. Maybe legacy was about the lives you touched, the ripples you created in the world. Maybe legacy was Sarah and Hope, alive and thriving because of a choice he made on a snowy night. Maybe legacy was this little boy who would grow up remembering a truck driver who turned out to be a hero. "You be whatever makes you happy, son," Harold said, his voice rough with emotion. "But if you do decide to drive trucks, I hope you'll remember what I'm about to tell you." Tyler nodded solemnly. "Every job is noble if you do it with honor. Every life is important, and every person you meet deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter who they are or what they do. The world will try to tell you otherwise. The world will try to convince you that some people matter more than others, that money makes you important, that fame makes you valuable. Don't believe it. Don't ever believe it." James, who had been listening nearby, put his hand on his son's shoulder. "That's good advice, Tyler. What do you say to Mr. Harold?" "Thank you, Mr. Harold," Tyler said. "I won't forget. I promise." Dolores came over with a fresh pot of coffee and refilled Harold's cup. "Breakfast is on the house today," she said. "Actually, breakfast is on the house for you for the rest of the year. Forever. Don't even try to argue." Harold tried to protest, but Dolores held up her hand. "Don't argue with me, Harold Mitchell. I've been serving you eggs and toast for 15 years, and this is the first time I've learned anything about you other than your order. You never told me you were a hero." "I'm not a hero," Harold said automatically. "You saved a pregnant woman in a blizzard," Dolores said. "Pretty sure that qualifies." "Dolores, I just did what anyone would have—" "Stop," Sarah interrupted. "Stop saying that. You need to understand something, Harold. I had given up. When you found me, I had accepted that I was going to die. I had already started saying goodbye to my baby in my head. I was making peace with God. You didn't just save me physically. You saved me from despair. You showed me that there was still good in the world, that there were still people who would risk their lives for a stranger. That knowledge has carried me through 20 years. When things got hard, when I wanted to give up, I would remember you. I would remember the man who stopped in a blizzard, and I would keep going." Harold didn't know what to say. He had never thought about it like that before. For him, that night had been just one of many on a long road. He had saved people before, had once helped pull a family from a burning RV, had once performed CPR on a man having a heart attack at a rest stop, had once chased down a car to tell them their child's stroller was still strapped to the roof. He had never kept count. He had never sought recognition. But hearing Sarah talk about how that night had affected her, how it had given her strength in her darkest moments, he began to understand something. The small acts of kindness we perform, the help we offer without expectation of reward, they don't just affect the immediate moment. They ripple outward, touching lives in ways we can never predict. "I need to ask you something," Hope said, her voice hesitant. "Anything," Harold replied. Would you come to my graduation next spring? I'm finishing nursing school. It would mean so much to me if you were there. You're the reason I'm alive. You're the reason I became a nurse. I want you to see what you made possible." Harold's heart swelled. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he said. The next few hours passed in a blur. Sarah and Hope shared their life stories with Harold, and he shared his. They talked about Margaret, about how they had met at a truck stop dance in 1978, how she had been the prettiest girl he had ever seen, and how he had been too scared to ask her to dance until the last song of the night. They talked about David, about his dreams of being an astronaut, about the car accident that had taken him too soon. They talked about the loneliness of life on the road and the strange beauty of watching the sun rise over 1,000 different horizons. Tyler's family eventually had to leave, but not before Tyler got his promised tour of Harold's Peterbilt. The boy's face was a picture of pure joy as Harold lifted him into the cab, let him honk the air horn, and explained all the dials and switches on the dashboard. "This is the best day of my whole life," Tyler declared, as his father finally pried him away from the truck. James shook Harold's hand firmly. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." "I didn't do anything special," Harold protested. "Yes, you did. You showed my son what a real hero looks like. That's worth more than I can say." Maria, Tyler's mother, hugged Harold tightly. "Thank you for being the kind of person the world needs more of," she whispered. As Tyler's family drove away, Harold turned to find Sarah and Hope waiting by his truck. "We should let you get back on the road," Sarah said reluctantly. "You probably have deliveries to make." Harold glanced at his watch. He was already 6 hours behind schedule. His dispatcher was going to have words with him, but somehow that didn't seem to matter as much as it once had. "Where are you two headed?" Harold asked. "Back to Denver," Sarah said. "Hope has clinicals tomorrow." "Denver," Harold repeated. "That's funny. I'm headed that way myself after a stop in Amarillo." Sarah's eyes widened. "You're not suggesting—" "I have to pass right through Denver. Seems silly for you to drive all the way back when I could drop you off." "We couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition," Harold said firmly. "It would be an honor. Besides, it'll give us more time to talk. 20 years is a lot to catch up on." And so, an hour later, Harold Mitchell pulled his Peterbilt 389 out of the Flying J truck stop with 2 unexpected passengers. Sarah sat in the jump seat behind him, while Hope had claimed the passenger seat, watching the world roll by through the windshield with an expression of wonder. "I've never been in a truck before," Hope admitted. "This is amazing. It's so high up. You can see everything." Harold smiled. "Wait until we hit the plains. Nothing but sky and road as far as you can see. That's when you understand why people like me keep driving, even when our bodies tell us to stop." As they drove, they continued to share stories. Hope talked about her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse, of working with sick children and helping families through the worst times of their lives. Sarah talked about her marriage, her divorce, and how she had raised Hope on her own for most of the girl's life. "It wasn't easy," Sarah admitted. "There were times I didn't know how we were going to make it. Single mom, working 2 jobs, trying to go back to school at the same time. But every time I felt like giving up, I would remember that night. I would remember that I had been given a second chance, and I owed it to Hope to make the most of it." "You've done an incredible job," Harold said. "She's a wonderful young woman." Hope blushed. "I had a great mom. She never let me forget where I came from, what we survived. She always told me that life is a gift, and we have to make it count." They stopped for lunch at a small diner in the Texas Panhandle, where the waitress looked at the unlikely trio with curious eyes, but said nothing. Harold ordered a burger, his first deviation from his usual eggs and toast in longer than he could remember. It felt like a day for breaking routines. As they ate, Harold's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked. "Just my dispatcher. He's not happy about me being late." "I'm sorry. This is our fault." "No," Harold said firmly. "Don't apologize. Some things are more important than schedules. My dispatcher will understand. And if he doesn't, well, I've been meaning to slow down anyway." "Are you thinking about retiring?" Hope asked. Harold considered the question. "I've thought about it," he admitted. "Margaret, my wife, she always wanted me to retire so we could travel together, not in a truck, but in an RV, see the national parks, visit family, but I kept putting it off. I told myself there was always next year, always more time." He paused, his eyes growing distant. "Then she got sick, cancer. She was gone within 6 months. All those trips we were going to take, all those plans we made, they never happened. I'll never forgive myself for that." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said softly. "Thank you, but you know what? I don't regret the years I spent on the road. I regret not being there for her at the end as much as I should have been. I regret missing holidays and birthdays, but the driving itself, that was who I am. That's who I've always been." Margaret understood that, even if she wished things were different. She married a trucker. She knew what she was getting into. "My mother was the same way," Hope said. "She was a nurse for 30 years. Even when I was little, she was always picking up extra shifts, always putting patients first. I used to resent it. I thought she loved her job more than she loved me." "Hope," Sarah said, a note of pain in her voice. "Let me finish, Mom. I thought that when I was young, but as I got older I started to understand. Being a nurse wasn't just what she did, it was who she was. Helping people, caring for them, that was her calling. And you know what? It made her better. It made her more compassionate, more patient, more understanding. The mother I have is the mother she became because of her work, not in spite of it. Harold nodded slowly. That's a wise observation. Too many people think you have to choose between your work and your family. But the truth is, they're connected. The person you become through your work, whether you become kinder or crueler, more patient or more frustrated, more generous or more selfish, that's the person who comes home to your family. Is that why you kept driving? Sarah asked, after Margaret passed? Partly, Harold admitted, but also because I didn't know what else to do. Margaret was my anchor. Without her, I felt lost. The only thing that made sense was to keep moving, keep driving, keep doing the one thing I knew how to do. That sounds lonely, Hope said quietly. It was. It is. But today, Harold glanced at the two women sitting across from him. Today has made me feel less alone than I have in years. Today has reminded me why I keep going. They finished their lunch and got back on the road. The Texas landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, flat and brown and dotted with oil derricks and windmills. Harold pointed out landmarks as they passed. The Cadillac Ranch, where old cars were buried nose down in the earth, and the big Texan Steak Ranch, where you could eat a 72-ounce steak for free if you finished it in an hour. Did you ever try it? Hope asked, laughing at the absurdity. Once, back in '89, Harold admitted. Made it about 40 ounces before I had to give up. Nearly made myself sick. Margaret laughed so hard she cried. Sarah laughed. I can just imagine she must have found that hilarious. She did. She never let me forget it. Every anniversary after that she'd ask me if I wanted to try again. Said she'd even help me train. Lord, I miss her. The stories continued as the miles rolled by. Harold learned that Sarah had remarried 5 years ago to a widower named Frank, who had 2 children of his own. Hope had gained not just a stepfather, but 2 stepbrothers who she adored. Frank, Sarah said, was the opposite of her first husband. Stable, reliable, present. He's not exciting, Sarah admitted. He's not the kind of person who makes your heart race. But he's the kind of person who shows up. Every day, without fail, he shows up. And after everything I went through with Hope's father, that means more to me than all the excitement in the world. Showing up, Harold repeated. That's what matters, isn't it? Not the grand gestures, but the daily commitment. Being there day after day, whether it's exciting or not. Exactly. That's what you did that night in the blizzard. You showed up. You were there when I needed someone, when no one else would stop. Hope had pulled out her phone and was scrolling through something. Her expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, to something like wonder. Mom, Harold, you need to see this. She turned her phone around. On the screen was a TikTok video, but not the one Brandon had recorded. This was different. It was titled, "TikToker Gets Reality Check at Truck Stop," and it showed the events of that morning from a completely different angle. Someone else was recording, Hope explained. One of the other patrons. They watched as the video played. It showed Brandon approaching Harold, showed his cruel comments and mocking tone, but it also showed everything that happened afterward. Sarah's arrival, the reunion, Tyler's innocent admiration, and most importantly, Harold's quiet dignity throughout the entire ordeal. The video had already been viewed over 2 million times. The comments were overwhelming. This trucker is a real one. Saved lives and didn't even brag about it. Brandon Flex is cancelled. What a garbage human being. This is what a hero looks like. Not some influencer with a Lambo. I'm literally crying. That little boy's face when he met the truck driver hero. My grandfather was a trucker. They're the backbone of this country. Show some respect. Faith in humanity restored. Thank you, Harold. Harold stared at the screen, overwhelmed. I don't understand. Why do so many people care? Because you're real, Hope said. In a world full of fake people chasing clout, you're actually real. You don't do things for attention or likes. You do them because they're right. People are starving for that kind of authenticity. Sarah took Harold's hand. You deserve this. You deserve to be recognized for who you are." As they continued their drive through the afternoon, Harold's phone began to buzz with increasing frequency. Calls from numbers he didn't recognize, text messages from his few contacts who had seen the video. Even his dispatcher called, but this time his tone was different. "Harold, what the heck happened at that truck stop?" "I'm getting calls from news stations asking about you." "It's nothing, Gene, just a misunderstanding that got out of hand." "A misunderstanding? Harold, you're trending on Twitter. They're calling you the trucker hero. Someone started a GoFundMe in your name. It's already over $50,000. Harold nearly swerved the truck. "What? I'm not kidding." "And that influencer kid who was giving you grief. He posted an apology video, says he's taking a break from content to reevaluate his priorities. You broke him, Harold. You broke an influencer." Harold didn't know what to say. This was not how he had expected his day to go when he woke up in his truck cab that morning. "Look, take whatever time you need," Gene continued. "The load can wait. Hell, I'll send someone else for it. You've earned a rest. Take a week off. Take 2 weeks. Take as long as you need." After hanging up, Harold relayed the conversation to Sarah and Hope, who were both grinning. "You're famous," Hope teased. "I don't want to be famous. I just want to do my job and be left alone." "Too late for that," Sarah said, but her tone was gentle. "But Harold, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe this is the universe's way of telling you that your story matters, that you matter. I'm 67 years old. What am I supposed to do with fame at 67? Whatever you want," Hope said. "That's the beautiful thing. You can ignore it, embrace it, use it for good. Whatever feels right to you." They crossed into New Mexico as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that took Hope's breath away. She took dozens of photos through the windshield, marveling at the beauty of the landscape. "I can't believe I've never done this before," she said. "Taken a road trip, I mean. A real one, not just driving somewhere for a purpose." "That's the magic of the road," Harold said. "It's not just about getting somewhere. It's about what you see along the way. The America most people know is cities and airports and malls. But there's a whole other America out here. Small towns, big skies, people who wave at you even though they don't know you." "It sounds like a poem," Hope said. "Maybe it is. I'm not much for poetry, but the road has a rhythm to it, a heartbeat. Once you get in sync with it, you don't ever want to stop." They stopped for the night at a truck stop just outside of Albuquerque. Harold rented 2 rooms at the attached motel, one for himself, one for Sarah and Hope, insisting that he pay despite their protests. "You've already given us more than we can ever repay," Sarah said. "At least let us buy dinner." "Deal." They ate at the truck stop diner, surrounded by other truckers who kept glancing at Harold with curiosity. Word had apparently spread. A few of them came over to shake his hand and slap him on the back. "Saw the video," one of them said, a burly man with a magnificent beard. "Proud to have you representing us, brother. You did us all proud." After dinner, they sat outside on a bench, watching the trucks come and go, listening to the distant hum of the highway. "I've been thinking," Harold said after a long silence, "about what that young man asked me, Brandon. He asked if I'd rather be doing something else, something that matters." "And?" Sarah prompted. "At the time, I couldn't answer him. I was too embarrassed, too caught off guard, but now I know what I would say." He turned to look at both of them. "What I do matters. Maybe not to him, maybe not to people who measure value in followers and likes, but it matters. Every time I deliver food to a grocery store, a family gets to eat. Every time I deliver medicine to a hospital, someone gets treated. Every time I deliver materials to a construction site, a house gets built, a school gets finished, a bridge gets completed. It's not glamorous. It's not exciting. But it's necessary. And doing necessary things well, doing them with integrity and care, that matters." Hope wiped a tear from her eye. "You should give speeches. Seriously. I'm too old for speeches, but I'm not too old to keep driving. And I'm not too old to appreciate days like today, when I'm reminded why I started doing this in the first place." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars emerge in the New Mexico sky. The Milky Way was visible here, far from the light pollution of the cities, a river of light stretching across the darkness. "My father used to say," Sarah said softly, "that the stars are the eyes of everyone who came before us, watching over us. I don't know if I believe that, but I like the thought of it." "I like it too," Harold said. "Margaret would be watching. And David." "Your son?" "Yes, he would have been 42 this year. He wanted to be an astronaut when he was little. He used to make me drive him out to dark places, away from the city lights, so he could look at the stars. He knew all the constellations, could point them out like they were old friends." "What happened to him?" Harold told them about the accident. A drunk driver running a red light. David had been killed instantly. The other driver had survived, had served 3 years in prison, and was now living somewhere in Florida, his debt to society supposedly paid. "I was angry for a long time," Harold admitted. "Angrier than I've ever been in my life. I wanted to hurt that man. I wanted him to suffer like I was suffering. Margaret was the one who pulled me back. She said that hating him wouldn't bring David back. She said that letting the anger consume me would just give that man more power over our lives. She was right, of course. She was always right. Did you ever forgive him?" "I don't know if I'd call it forgiveness. I stopped hating him. I let go of the anger. But I don't think about him much anymore. He's not part of my story. David is part of my story. Margaret is part of my story. The accident, that's just something that happened. It doesn't define us." They talked late into the night, until exhaustion finally forced them to their rooms. Harold lay on the motel bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing despite his tiredness. 20 years ago, he had stopped on a snowy road to help a stranger. He hadn't thought about it as anything special. He hadn't expected it to change his life. But now, here he was, connected to that stranger and her daughter in ways he never could have imagined. Life, he reflected, was strange. You never knew which moments would matter, which decisions would ripple forward through time. The small choices, the everyday kindnesses, they added up. They became something larger than themselves. He fell asleep thinking about Margaret, about the life they had shared and the life he had built in her absence. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel quite so alone. The next morning, they hit the road early, chasing the sunrise west toward Colorado. The landscape changed as they climbed in elevation, the flat brown desert giving way to pine forests and snow-capped peaks. Hope was quiet, staring out the window with a contemplative expression. "You okay?" Harold asked. "Just thinking about everything that had to happen for us to be here right now. All the choices, all the coincidences. If you hadn't stopped that night, if that TikToker hadn't walked into that truck stop, if my mom's cousin's husband hadn't known you, any one thing goes differently, and this moment doesn't exist. Makes you believe in fate," Sarah said from the back. "Maybe," Hope said, "or maybe it's just life, random and chaotic and beautiful. Either way, I'm grateful." They reached Denver in the late afternoon. Harold navigated through the city traffic, which he had always hated, until they reached Sarah's neighborhood, a pleasant suburban street lined with mature trees. A man was standing on the porch as they pulled up. Frank, Sarah's husband, looking equal parts worried and relieved. "You're back," he said, jogging down to meet them as they climbed out of the truck. "I was starting to wonder if you'd actually done it. Found him, I mean." "We found him," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Frank, this is Harold. Harold Mitchell." Frank's eyes went wide. He had heard the story countless times. He knew what this man meant to his wife, to his stepdaughter, to his family. "Mr. Mitchell," Frank said, extending his hand. "It's an honor. A genuine honor." Harold shook his hand firmly. "Please call me Harold, and the honor is mine." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Frank insisted Harold stay for dinner, which turned into Harold meeting the stepbrothers, teenage boys who were appropriately awed by the real-life hero in their kitchen, and then into coffee and more stories. and then into Frank refusing to let Harold drive another mile that night. "You can sleep in the guest room," Frank insisted. "No arguments. It's the least we can do." Harold tried to protest, but he was outnumbered, and truthfully, he was exhausted. The past 2 days had been more emotionally draining than any load he'd ever hauled. The guest room was comfortable, with a quilt on the bed that reminded Harold of one Margaret had made years ago. He fell asleep quickly, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of a household, footsteps, distant laughter, the clink of dishes being washed. He woke to the smell of bacon. Downstairs, the whole family was gathered around the kitchen table. Frank was at the stove, wearing an apron that said "Kiss the Cook" in faded letters. The boys were arguing about something to do with video games. Sarah and Hope were setting the table, moving around each other with the easy grace of people who had done this 1,000 times. "Good morning," Sarah said, smiling when she saw him. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in years," Harold admitted. Breakfast was a noisy, chaotic affair. Nothing like the solitary meals Harold usually ate in truck stops and rest areas. He found himself laughing at the boys' banter, offering Frank cooking tips based on his decades of diner experience, listening to Hope talk about her upcoming exams. It felt, he realized, like family. After breakfast, Harold knew he needed to get back on the road. His load in Amarillo was waiting, and he had already delayed longer than he should have. But saying goodbye was harder than he expected. "This isn't goodbye," Sarah said firmly, as if reading his thoughts. "This is just see you later. You're coming to Hope's graduation, remember? And before that, you're coming for Thanksgiving. No arguments. And Christmas," Hope added. "And my birthday in March. You're part of our family now, Harold. You don't get to disappear." Harold felt tears threatening again. He had cried more in the past 2 days than he had in the past 3 years. "I'd like that," he managed. "I'd like that very much." He hugged each of them in turn. Sarah, who clung to him like he was a lifeline. Hope, who whispered "thank you" into his ear. Frank, who squeezed his shoulder and said, "You're always welcome here." Even the boys, who tolerated the embrace with typical teenage awkwardness. Then he climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. In his rearview mirror, he could see them all standing on the porch, waving. He waved back, even though he knew they probably couldn't see it. The road stretched before him, the same as it always had. But something was different now. The solitude that had once felt like a weight felt lighter. The silence that had once felt like loneliness felt like peace. Harold Mitchell drove west, toward the setting sun, toward the next delivery, the next truck stop, the next chapter of his life. He didn't know what was waiting for him. He didn't know how much longer he would keep driving, or what he would do when he finally stopped. But he knew one thing for certain: he was not alone. He had never been alone. Every life he had touched, every person he had helped, every moment of kindness he had offered without expectation of reward, they were all connected to him, part of a vast web of human experience that stretched across time and space. A week later, Harold pulled into the Flying J truck stop outside of Tulsa, the same one where everything had happened. He was half expecting things to be different somehow, but it looked exactly the same. The same trucks lined up in the back, the same shimmering heat rising from the asphalt. He walked inside, and Dolores looked up from behind the counter, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Well, look who's back, the famous Harold Mitchell." "Don't start," Harold said, but he was smiling too. "Too late. You're a celebrity now. We've had people coming in asking about you. Tourists, can you believe it? Taking pictures of the counter where you were sitting." Harold shook his head in disbelief. "That's ridiculous." "That's the internet, honey. Sit down, I'll get your coffee." As Harold settled into his usual spot, he noticed something different about the truck stop. There were framed photographs on the wall that hadn't been there before. He stood up and walked over to look at them. They were pictures of truckers, dozens of them spanning what looked like decades. Each photo had a small plaque underneath with a name and a short description. "Ed Martinez, 45 years on the road." Delivered meals to hurricane victims in Florida, 2005. Lisa Chen, first female trucker to complete 1 million miles, pioneer and mentor. Robert Big Bob Johnson saved family from burning car on I-40, 1998. And at the end, a new frame. Harold Mitchell, 43 years on the road, hero of the snowy night. Dolores had come up behind him. The owner put these up after your story went viral. Figured it was time we honored the people who keep this place running. You're the newest addition. Harold stared at his picture, an old driver's license photo that must have been pulled from somewhere. He looked younger in it, less weathered, but his eyes were the same. I don't know what to say, he admitted. You don't have to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. The world needs more Harold Mitchells. He returned to his seat, and Dolores brought his coffee, and without asking, a slice of apple pie. On the house, she said. Forever, remember. As Harold sat there, drinking his coffee and eating his pie, the door chimed and a young man walked in. Harold recognized him immediately. It was Brandon Reeves, the TikToker. But he looked different. His hair wasn't as carefully styled. His clothes were simpler. He didn't have his phone out. Brandon scanned the room, and when his eyes landed on Harold, he froze. For a moment he seemed like he might turn and leave, but then he squared his shoulders and walked over. Mr. Mitchell, I didn't expect to find you here. I stop here every Tuesday, Harold said. Creature of habit. Brandon nodded. He looked nervous, uncertain, nothing like the confident provocateur who had humiliated Harold a week ago. Can I sit down? I'd like to talk if you're willing. Harold gestured to the empty stool beside him. Coffee? Sure. Thanks. Dolores poured him a cup, eyeing him with undisguised suspicion. I owe you an apology, Brandon said, staring at his coffee rather than at Harold. A real one. What I did was wrong. I've known that for a while, honestly, but I kept telling myself it was just content, just entertainment, that the people I was making fun of didn't really care, or that they were in on the joke somehow. They weren't, Harold said quietly. They never were. No, they weren't. Brandon finally looked up. I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day. I took a break from posting, like I said I would. And in that time, without the constant feedback, without the likes and the comments, I had to actually sit with myself, had to look at who I had become. And what did you see? Brandon let out a long breath. Someone I didn't like very much. Someone who made other people feel small, so he could feel big. Someone who confused attention for respect and followers for friends. He shook his head. I'm 26 years old, and I have millions of followers, but I don't have a single real friend. Not one person I could call at 2 in the morning if I needed help. Harold considered this. So what are you going to do about it? I don't know yet. I've thought about deleting all my accounts, starting over, but I'm not sure that running away is the answer either. Maybe there's a way to use what I've built for something better, something that actually helps people instead of hurting them. That would be a start. Brandon turned to face Harold fully. I wanted to ask you something, and you can say no. You have every right to say no. But I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to talk to me, on camera, not for content the way I used to do it, but for a real conversation, about your life, your work, what you've learned in 43 years on the road. I think people need to hear from someone like you, someone with actual wisdom, instead of just hot takes and outrage. Harold was silent for a long moment, considering the offer. Why me? He finally asked. Because you taught me something that day. When you talked about the kind of man you want to become, about how every day, with every choice, you're building your character, that stuck with me. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. And I figure, if I learned that much from a few minutes of talking to you, imagine what other people could learn. Harold thought about it. He thought about his instinct for privacy, for anonymity, for just doing his job without fanfare. He thought about the webcam in his face, the millions of strangers who would watch and judge and comment. But he also thought about Tyler, the little boy who had looked at him with such admiration. He thought about the comments on the video, the people who had been inspired by his story, who had said they wanted to be kinder because of what they had seen. He thought about Hope, who was dedicating her life to helping others because of what he had done 2 decades ago. Maybe this was another way to help, another stop on the road. "All right," Harold said, "but I have conditions. Name them. No gotcha moments. No editing things to make me look foolish. You present the conversation honestly, or you don't present it at all." "Absolutely. I'll even let you approve the final edit before it goes up. And I want you to do more of these. Not just with me, but with other truckers, fast food workers, construction crews, garbage collectors, all the people you used to make fun of. Give them a platform to tell their stories." Brandon smiled, a genuine smile, not the performative one Harold had seen before. I'd like that a lot." They talked for another hour, right there at the counter of the Flying J. Brandon asked questions, and Harold answered them. About his childhood in rural Oklahoma, about meeting Margaret at a truck stop dance in 1978, about the early days of trucking when there were no GPS systems and you had to navigate by paper maps and intuition. He talked about the loneliness of the road and the strange community that formed among truckers despite that loneliness. He talked about the changes he had seen in the industry, the rise of technology, the decline of CB radios, the constant pressure to drive faster and sleep less. And he talked about the moments that had made it all worthwhile, the sunrises and sunsets, the kindness of strangers, the sense of purpose that came from doing necessary work well. By the time they were done, Harold felt wrung out, but also strangely exhilarated. He had spent so many years keeping to himself, and there was a relief in finally sharing his story. "Thank you," Brandon said as they stood to leave. "This means more to me than you know." "Just do right by it," Harold replied. "That's all I ask." They shook hands and Brandon walked out to his car, a rental sedan, not a Lamborghini. Dolores came over to clear Harold's plate. "You're a good man, Harold Mitchell, giving that kid a second chance." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Harold said. "I've had plenty of them in my life." He paid his bill. Dolores still refused to let him pay for the pie and walked out into the afternoon sun. His truck was waiting for him, gleaming in the light. As he climbed into the cab and started the engine, his phone buzzed. A text from Hope, counting down the days to graduation, only 127 left. "Can't wait for you to be there." Harold smiled and typed a reply. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Drive safe out there." He pulled out of the parking lot and onto the highway, joining the endless stream of trucks heading west. The road stretched before him, familiar and endless and full of possibility. In his 43 years of driving, Harold Mitchell had seen a lot. He had seen the best of humanity and the worst. He had saved lives and lost people he loved. He had been invisible and briefly famous. But through all of it, one thing had remained constant: the road. It was always there, waiting for him, ready to carry him to the next destination. And as long as he could still climb into that cab and put his hands on the wheel, he would keep driving. Because that's who he was. That's who he had always been. Not a hero, not a celebrity, just a man doing his job 1 mile at a time, trying to leave the world a little better than he found it. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Harold turned on the radio. Willie Nelson was singing about being on the road again, and let the music carry him forward. Tomorrow there would be more deliveries to make, more miles to cover, more stories to collect. But tonight there was just this: the open road, the fading light, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. 3 months later, Harold sat in the audience of a university auditorium in Denver, wearing a tie for the first time in years. Beside him were Sarah and Frank, and on Sarah's other side were the stepbrothers, looking uncomfortable in their dress shirts, but present nonetheless. The graduation ceremony was long and full of speeches that Harold didn't really listen to. He was too busy watching the rows of graduates, waiting for one particular face. When Hope's name was called, Harold stood up before anyone else. He clapped so hard his hands hurt, and he didn't care who saw the tears streaming down his face. Hope walked across the stage, accepted her diploma, and then did something that wasn't on the program. She stopped at the microphone and leaned in. "I'd like to dedicate this diploma to a man in the audience today. 20 years ago, before I was even born, he saved my mother's life and mine. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because it was the right thing to do. Harold Mitchell, will you please stand up?" A spotlight found Harold in the crowd. He felt his face flush, felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. But he stood up anyway, because Hope had asked him to. The auditorium erupted in applause, standing ovation. People who didn't even know his story were on their feet, clapping for the old trucker in the bad tie. Hope found his eyes across the crowd and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Harold nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything but stand there and let the moment wash over him. Later, after the ceremony, the whole family gathered in the parking lot. Hope ran to Harold and threw her arms around him. "You made it," she said. "You actually made it. I told you I would. I know. But saying and doing are 2 different things. You do. You always do." They posed for photos, Harold in the middle, surrounded by his new family. It was awkward and chaotic and absolutely perfect. As they were getting ready to leave, a man approached Harold. He was older, maybe Harold's age, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Mr. Mitchell, my name is Henry Castellanos. I produce documentaries for PBS. I've been following your story, and I wonder if you'd be interested in being part of a film we're making about the trucking industry. Real stories from real drivers." Harold thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Can I talk about Margaret?" he asked. "You can talk about whatever you want. This is your story." "Then yes, I'd be honored." Henry handed him a business card. "I'll be in touch. And Mr. Mitchell, thank you for your service. Not just to Sarah and Hope, but to all of us. We don't thank truck drivers enough." "We don't thank anyone enough," Harold replied. "Maybe that's something we should work on." The documentary aired 6 months later. It was called 18 Wheels of Life, and Harold's segment was one of 5 stories featured. The film received critical acclaim, was nominated for an Emmy, and introduced millions of people to the often overlooked world of long-haul trucking. Harold became something of an unofficial spokesman for the industry. He gave interviews to newspapers and podcasts. He spoke at industry conferences. He even testified before Congress about the need for better rest stop facilities and mental health resources for truckers. But he never stopped driving. Every few weeks, he would climb back into his Peterbilt and hit the road, alone with his thoughts and the endless highway. It was where he belonged. It was where he would always belong. On his 68th birthday, Harold pulled into the Flying J in Tulsa for the 100th time. Dolores was there, as always, with his coffee already poured. "Happy birthday, old man," she said, sliding a slice of pie toward him. "Apple, with a candle. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. Make a wish." Harold looked at the small flame flickering on his pie. A year ago, he would have wished for Margaret to come back, for David to be alive, for all the loss and loneliness to somehow be undone. But now, he wished for something different. He wished for the strength to keep going, to keep helping, to keep making the world a little bit better, one stop at a time. He blew out the candle. His phone buzzed with birthday messages. Hope had sent a video of herself singing "Happy Birthday." Sarah had sent a long text thanking him for being part of their lives. Frank had sent a photo of a welcome mat that said Harold's Room, which they had apparently installed in their guest room. Even Brandon had sent a message. His redemption had been real. His new content focused on elevating everyday workers, and his platform had become a voice for the overlooked and underappreciated. He credited Harold with changing his life. "You look happy," Dolores observed. "I am," Harold said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "I really am." He finished his coffee, his pie, and his birthday reflections. Then he paid his bill, left a generous tip, and walked back out to his truck. The road was waiting. It would always be waiting, and Harold Mitchell, 68 years old and counting, would always answer the call. As he pulled onto the highway, he thought about all the miles he had driven and all the miles still to come. He thought about Margaret, watching over him from wherever she was. He thought about David, the astronaut who never was, looking down from the stars. He thought about Sarah and Hope, about Tyler and his toy truck, about Dolores and her endless coffee, about Brandon and his second chance. Harold Mitchell had spent his life on the road, and the road had given him everything, not fame, not fortune, something better, connection, purpose, love. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold. Harold turned on the radio and let the music carry him forward, because that's what truckers do, until the very end.